Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Yet another PUA webinar, a very special event tonight, a very special topic, very special speaker. We're going to cover a topic which is not commonly covered. It's not often talked about, which is unfortunate. But we're very fortunate to have this conversation tonight with Rabbi Michael Bleisher. Rabbi Michael Bleisher was in the rabbinate, the pulpit rabbinate, for 10 plus years, a very successful rabbi. And now he is the director of clinical training at Achieve Behavioral Health. He has his own private practice. He is very well known and world renowned in the field of psychology, certainly in the Jewish world. And it is really an honor and a privilege to have Rabbi Bleisher with us tonight. We want to conclude before opening up the floor with words of introduction with Rabbi Bleisher, but I wanted to also dedicate tonight's session Luili Nishmas, Ari ben Yosef. His neshama should have a very high and beautiful aliyah. Rabbi Bleisher, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I see more people are coming in now, and I know that there are many people who have requested the recording. So this is definitely a hot topic. It's a serious topic, and it's a topic that needs to be addressed, and that is the male perspective, the male part of the fertility journey. It used to be, it was, anyone who you asked years ago, who is the culprit? Whose fault is it when it comes to infertility? And it was always the woman's fault. Always she was her issue and this and that. Fault is such a strong word, and it's someone's fault. But these were words that were being thrown around years ago when just a level of sensitivity just wasn't there. Fast forward to 2024, where we have so many resources, so much support. And first of all, it's important for us to make it very clear to everyone who's on this call, everyone who's watching this, and everyone who will watch this, that no one should suffer alone. No one should go through whatever they're going through alone. The resources are there, whether it's PUA, whether it's Rabbi Bleisher's private practice, whatever it may be, and everything in between. There are so many resources available for the couples. Tonight, what we want to focus on is being a resource for the male, for the male who may be experiencing male infertility, male factor infertility, which was a real chiddush. Just a few years ago when the data came out that 50% of infertility cases can be attributed to male factor. 50%. It was always assumed that it was the woman's issue. It is not true. Based on current data, it is just as much a male issue as it is a female issue, which means that 50% of the time, approximately 50% of the time, we have to offer the support and the resources for the male because they may not know how to interpret the fact that they are going through infertility and it's because of them. And then beyond the male who is experiencing his own issue, and of course that plays a major role in the marriage, but what about the cases where it's female factor or it's unexplained, neither him nor her? And males and females are different. I don't need to tell you that. I don't need to tell anyone on this call that. We're different in so many different ways, but mainly for our purposes tonight, how people cope, how people deal with pain, frustration, guilt, etc., infertility may be very different. And I think I've heard this from many, many, many men. How am I supposed to support my wife when we're just not on the same page? I don't view our struggles the way she views our struggles. I don't view our disappointments the way that she views the disappointment. And tonight I would like to present perspective for all of those people, so many of us who are going through our struggles, but we're not on the same page as our wives, and yet they look to us for support. How are we supposed to view that? So those are really two main topics that I want to focus on this evening. And I think the chat box is available for those who want to for those who want to type in any messages for Rabbi Bleisher, myself, and really Rabbi Bleisher, let's begin. Let's start with. I mean, would you like to or words of introduction? I'm sorry that I didn't offer that to you before. Welcome,
Thank you
Rabbi
so much for
Bleisher.
this evening. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me this evening and for really being able to create a space for us to discuss the male impact, the male experience of infertility. I want to start by thanking you and really PUA as a whole for your leadership in this field and being able to give couples and individuals that are struggling with infertility an address to be able to reach out to for all kinds of support, emotional support, halachic support, guidance, hashgacha, and so much more. And your commitment to investing all of your kochos and nefesh, yom and v'layla, wherever it is in the country and even the world, really is a testament to the commitment that Rabbi Bernstein and Eretz Yisrael and the entire staff, Rabbi Krohn and others, have for supporting couples, and that Emir Hashem, we should be zocha to celebrate uh, the simchas and the realization of the hopes and dreams that couples have when they stand under the chuppah. You know, you said it so poignantly that most of the discussion about infertility usually is focused on the wife, on women. And seldom are things exclusively for men like they are tonight. You know, Chazal focused so much on the infertility of the imahos, of Sarah and Rivka and Rachel and then Chana. And it's not until we get to the Gemara and Maseches Yevamos that the Gemara teaches us Yitzchak Avinu Akarhaya, that Yitzchak Avinu also struggled with infertility. We might call it male factor infertility. And so this might feed the perception that infertility is a women's issue. And that's because regardless of, you know, whether it's male factor, female factor, or unexplained, each one, as you pointed out, is about 33% of the incidence of infertility. But it's the female who's the identified patient. She's the one going for sonograms. She's the one that's going for a lot of the testing and the evaluations. And he's also going for some of that. But oftentimes she bears the burden as the identified patient. And I think that is where the struggle comes from. And it creates this gap, this divide potentially between husband and wife over something that's so important. But in fact, male infertility is just as common. And so I think that especially this time of year, when, at least in the New York area, many couples, wife will go up to the country or she'll be in camp and the husband is home. This is really a great opportunity for us to focus on the male's experience. And I think, you know, to a great extent, we're talking now Bein HaMetzarim and the opportunity to tap into the pain of Churban Beis HaMikdash. For couples that are going through infertility, sometimes every month or every failed treatment and every failed cycle feels like this sense of avelus that we're experiencing. And so, Be'ezus Hashem, the more that we're able to be mechazik each other, and the more support and chizuk that we can give, the sooner that we'll be able to realize the dreams and the tefillos of our geula.
Beautiful. I do want to address something that someone posted on the chat, which I think is a very good point. That although in our introductory words that we focused on two camps or two types of situations, the male factor, and then there's the female factor, and the husband is not on the same page, kind of wants to know how to be able to support his wife. It's true that we neglected to mention there are many couples who are on the same page. They do find themselves on the same page, and yet they feel alone. The male feels alone. Not that he's not getting the support from his wife per se, but he needs that outlet, that recognition that the male is part of the union, is part of the couple, is part of this family who's experiencing the infertility and is looking for that space, looking for that outlet, looking for the opportunity to seek out support. So, you know, I definitely thank you for offering that insight. I think it's extremely important, and hopefully our words tonight we'll be able to address all situations. Let's start, Rabbi Bleisher, with your permission, with a patient who is actually going through male factor infertility, whether it's low sperm count or it's poor quality sperm, whatever it is, azoospermic. It's really hard to find sperm, and month after month, she gets her period, no pregnancy. And kind of like I said it before, fault. It's a really horrible word, but like at a certain point, do our fingers being pointed, and even if fingers aren't being pointed by the wife, the male can often look at himself and say, "This is because of me." right? If she would have married somebody else, she might not have to experience this pain, this trauma, this disappointment, this frustration. And there's a sense of guilt, a sense of shame, a sense of just utter disappointment. Like, how is the male supposed to go ahead with life with all of that baggage, with all of that those heavy emotions that are really weighing him down?
I think the premise of your question is a very healthy one, and that is that many men in society, in many communities, assumes that men don't really have feelings, that they just kind of like go through their day, they wake up in the morning, you go to minyan, you learn, you go to work, maybe whatever you do, but that there's no emotional experience or facet to that experience, to that role. And I think it's important to recognize that just because men don't typically express themselves or verbalize their feelings doesn't mean that they don't have feelings about the journey that they're on. And recent studies actually show that men experience a variety of very complex emotional reactions, including anxiety, depression, a sense of helplessness and sadness, to say nothing of the guilt and blame. Um, I think that those last two, when we start pointing fingers at anybody, even ourselves, it doesn't make anything better. There's nothing that anybody did wrong. There's no reason to feel guilty about struggling with infertility. You could say, oh, I wish I could have done another round of treatment, or I wish we would have been more proactive. But hindsight's 2020. And it's important for us to take a compassionate lens when we're on this journey that is so complicated, it's so time consuming, it's so draining, that being able to judge ourselves less and certainly to judge our spouses less is really, really helpful. I think part of the intensity and the depth of those feelings that arise is not only because of the shame and judgment that they might be feeling from a spouse, but also for those of us in the Jewish community, we know that having children plays such an important role in the Jewish calendar. You go think about on Shabbos, many families bless their children on Friday night. Women, when they light Shabbos candles, say a prayer to be able to have children that are righteous, and children and grandchildren, and on a weekly basis, that can be a trigger and a source of great pain and a reminder of what they don't have from week to week. We think about the Kohen Gadol, the high priest on Yom Kippur, when he would go into the Holy of Holies, and one of the most poignant moments among what's the highlight of the Kohen Gadol's tefillah on Yom Kippur is Shana Shalatapil Isha Privedna, that a woman should not miscarry. And so this is something that is really embedded within our culture, within the fabric of our culture. And that is an important lens with which we look at treatment, because sometimes treatment seems to go in the face of halacha. A man who otherwise, would never be doing certain things is all of a sudden asked to produce a sperm sample in a clinic. And, I've had clients call me the night before they're supposed to be going to the clinic, and they're like, how could it be that I'm going to have a child, or that I'm going to evaluate my reproductive potential by violating halacha? And the cognitive dissonance that comes up in that kind of environment, in that scenario, is very deep. And it requires a lot of conversation, a lot of forethought, a lot of support. But it also requires somebody noticing that that experience is troubling, is difficult. And oftentimes, wives don't always understand that that's going on in the back of their minds. I see a comment in the chat box that for medical treatment it is okay. I'm not getting into when is it okay or when is not okay. You can call Rabbi Siegelman can answer that, Shaila, Rabbi Krohn, and many others. Just pointing out that it's something that we don't typically do, and that is complicated. That creates a lot of pain. On a social level, we have the Mamari Chazal that tell us that a person who's struggling with infertility is chashav kames, and then Tziv explains it's because he doesn't see a spiritual future beyond himself. He feels like he's spiritually dead. He might feel guilty that he can't help his wife realize her dreams, the maternal instinct of being a mother, let alone his own dream of growing his family. Emotionally, he might feel marginalized, again, because so much of the infertility treatment revolves around the woman, around his wife. And especially during COVID, and some clinics haven't even gone back to this, he might not even be allowed in the office to support his wife when she's going for those appointments. And that creates a lot of distance as well. And so when you put this all together, he can feel like he doesn't really have any level of entitlement to have his own feelings or to have his own stress reaction because she's the hero, she's the warrior, she's going through treatment. And he can feel pressured to have to support her after every test, every blood test, every sonogram. But he also has feelings. And it's important to be able to tend to that. 40% of men report depressive symptoms after a failed IVF cycle, even 18 months later. That is a profoundly high number.
Wow.
And
Wow.
you think of like, oh, we're just going to move on to the next cycle. It's not so simple. And we have to be able to tend to those feelings. And I think the impact is profound. And that's really why we're here, because we know that the number one reason that couples drop out of fertility treatment is not for financial reasons or even because it's so disruptive to their schedule. It's because of emotional distress. Emotional distress is something that you don't see. Men don't really talk about it so much. And so having a forum here tonight where people can listen and can learn more about this is really so important so that he doesn't withdraw from his wife, from his family, as he might otherwise. And so some of the things, that he can do while he's trying to cope with this is to
Yeah,
learn
let's
to
let's get
express
to
himself.
some
Right?
tips. What tips, Eitzah's guidance, insight can you offer our listeners to kind of to lift up the morale, to imbue chizuk, right, into that relationship, positivity, optimism at a time where they're literally down and broken? How can we pick up the pieces? How can we just present things in a more positive trajectory?
So again, I want to acknowledge the premise of the question, and that is that they need to be more optimistic. And sometimes it's important to recognize that there will be days on the fertility journey where it just doesn't feel good. There could be physical pain, there could be sadness, and sometimes people mean well, and they're like, "Oh, it's going to be okay. You're going to go back, and you'll get good results." And I think it's okay for us to say in this space that sometimes it's just not a good day and we can be optimistic about reaching the goal in the long term, but we don't need to force ourselves to feel happy when inside we're really feeling very low. So, some things that we could do is to learn how to express ourselves, to express what we need to be able to feel good. Maybe that means taking a break and going out, on our own, taking some space for the husband to have time alone by himself. We learned that from Yaakov Avinu after Rachel Imenu died. The pasuk says that he picks up his camp and he goes on elsewhere. And the Nitziv points out that he needed time for hisbodedus. He needed time to be by himself so that he could accept the decree that Hashem had given him and then move forward with caring for himself and his family. And so there's something that, on the face seems very cold. How can I be going off and taking time to myself when my wife is crying and she needs support? But you can't give her support if you don't have that support for yourself first. And I think it's important to recognize, as you pointed out earlier, you know, my wife is feeling this way and I'm feeling so differently. Men and women cope with things very differently. And it could be that the very thing that he needs, which is time to himself, and going off by himself, is the exact thing that is the most painful for his wife. And we just can acknowledge that. And so he's not deserting her, but he's telling her, I need an hour, or I need 3 hours, or I need some time, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to reconnect in some way. And that's really important to highlight because it can feel very rejecting and very lonely. So being able to express yourself, being able to learn stress management skills of how to cope, of whether it's meditation, whether it's exercise, recognizing that the way that it feels right now, when you got that call from the doctor's office or the pain that you're feeling physically, all of this is going to change. It's going to soften over time. And we think about the grief that we feel, let's say Motzei Tisha B'Av, and feeling like, I really want the Beis Hamikdash to be rebuilt. And I feel really sad that I couldn't do it. It's another Tisha B'Av I spent on the floor. And you think like a month or two later, when you're on vacation before Elul, you don't feel that same sense of sadness. And so all these feelings are going to change. They're going to evolve. It's fluid. And recognizing that can be very helpful because sometimes we feel like this is going to last forever and I can't tolerate that. So knowing that it might be hard right now, but it's going to be different. It's going to get better. Another thing is to recognize that there are things that I can do to nurture other parts of myself. I can nurture other relationships that I have. I can pursue, some hobby or some learning goals. When you look back at the time that you spent struggling with infertility, pursuing treatment, pursuing that goal, are there other things that you were also able to accomplish in the meantime? For some people, it's something that they learn, something, a chesed that they take on. People go for, another degree and they pursue a new career while they're waiting for this. And there are also, couples goals that they could set for themselves. And so over time, they arrive at a new sense of mission, and that, God willing, when that child arrives, when they hold that baby in their arms, they've developed themselves further into someone that they even better than they were when they started out on this journey.
Nice, nice. I want to go back on something that you said. I thought it was such an important point, but I want a little bit of clarity and a little bit of to ask you, I think, a difficult question. You spoke about the importance of the male recognizing the need for support, the need to have those emotions, to experience those emotions. What would happen, because I'm sure it's happened, if he begins to explore his emotions? It could be that he's finding case he's like coming to terms with the fact that he actually is an emotional being and he has feelings, and this is paining him. What happens when he starts to explore and he touches upon those feelings to his wife, who then gets offended, like especially if his it like you don't have a right to, you don't have a right to come to me and tell me how you feel lonely and how you feel this. All of my friends are this, and all of my and all the community is this, and you have your group in shul, your minyan, whether or not you have kids.
Yeah.
I don't come to kiddush by myself. I can't come to kiddush by myself. So if she were to kind of like push back and say, you exist independent of your kids, I, as a mother, or not being a mother, I can't even exist. So like what would your Eitzah be to a male who tries to kind of tap into his pain and look for really important support, but kind of that friction when his wife kind of maybe misunderstands
Mhm.
his his desire or his need for, for support, guidance, whatever
Yeah.
that is.
I think what he's really looking for in that scenario is validation, that this is not a contest. It's not that you're more in pain, you're in more pain than I am. It's that we are both in pain. And this might be the first time in their marriage that she sees him in pain, that he's always been strong. Oh, he's so strong. He's always at your side. People don't like to be strong. We're strong when we need to be because the circumstances call for it, but we don't like to be strong. We like to be ourselves. And for him to be able to say, you're 100% right. It is impossible for you to exist in the way that, without being a mother in this community. And it's really hard for you to go out of the house every day and to go about your day and to come to shul in any capacity. And I understand that 100%. And there are also moments when I experience a similar kind of pain in my own way. And I don't need you to minimize your pain in any way. I just need you to see mine also. And if that's something that's too hard, if she can't do that because her pain is so enormous and is so large, then that would really be a time for them to seek outside support. Whether speaking to a Rav or speaking to a therapist who can help rebalance things a little bit. Because sometimes we feel like there's nobody's pain like mine. And when we talk about a couple, it's important for them to recognize that they're going through this together. And Emir Hashem, they will get through this together. But being able to see the other's experience is so important because, Emir Hashem, when the baby's born, right, so she's going to be taking care of the baby. She's going to be feeding the baby. There will be things that she will be doing that he won't be doing, that she will be limited in her ability to be out and about, at least for the first couple of weeks, regardless of how things go thereafter. And so just making space for each other's experience is going to be a very important skill for each of them for the rest of their lives together.
How do you help couples who cope differently. And I'll give you an example. The wife wants to be open. They're going through IVF. The wife wants to be open. She wants to tell her friends what she's going through. She wants to tell her boss what she's going through, whether it's because that's, it's it, she's able to connect to more people. And the more you open up to people, these are my personal experiences, the more you open up to people, the more you realize how not isolated you are, how how this is not exclusively your issue. This is so common, and you would never even know it if you haven't even opened up that conversation, to those lines of communication. You're also struggling with that. You also, oh my goodness, I would have never known. So she
And one,
likes to
one in
be out
five
there.
couples, one in five couples are going to struggle with infertility over the course of their lives.
hundred
That's a
percent
very high percentage.
Yeah. So she finds comfort in talking about her struggles, talking about her pain, talking about her experience. And he is embarrassed. He's ashamed. He's embarrassed. Don't tell anyone. I don't want you to talk. And then, it's awkward when I go to shul and I see her husband. I sit next to him and I know that he knows, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
How should that kind of, she wants to respect him. I realize that you're embarrassed and shamed, although there's nothing for you to be embarrassed about. There's nothing, she reassures him that we're in this together and I love you and I'm supporting you. But on the other hand, like, it's really important for her to talk to her friends. So how do they strike that balance? How would you guide a couple who are kind of coming from it very different angles?
You know, it brings me back to the very first couple that I saw in the infertility space. It was a couple where they had a close friend that was also struggling with infertility. And the wife was speaking to her friend very often. And the husband was talking about stocks or sports or business. They never said a word about their own experience, even though their wives were very open about it. And she wanted him to be able to get some more support from his friend. It wasn't like a total stranger. It was somebody that he knew well. And he couldn't bring himself to do it. He was too resilient. He was too proud. Um, and it was really, really hard. It was holding him back. And I think to deepen the question from your perspective, from the question that you posed, we have a disagreement, a fundamental disagreement between husband and wife. I have a need. Women often have more of a need to be able to verbally share their experience with others. That's how they feel more supported in most cases. Men often like keeping things inside, and that's how they feel more support. They can figure it out on their own, they can process it in different ways. I think it's about recognizing my wife has a need. She has a need to share this. And for her to recognize my husband has a need for this to stay between us. Now, when you put it that way, it's not so different from many other needs that husbands and wives have that we need to be able to negotiate. We need to be able to handle about. So what are some ways that we can accommodate both of our needs? Can we agree to come up with certain people who the wife can share it with from the husband's perspective, somebody that he maybe trusts and knows that will be able to keep it confidential, someone who he knows will be a supportive and consistent presence in his wife's world so that she really gets what she needs from this friend. And can the wife understand and respect her husband's need not to be able to share this widely? And I think that that's going to be a tough conversation. I think it's a skill that they can learn, but I think when we broaden it from, it's not just about infertility, right? There's so many other parts of our identity. There's so many other things that women might share, men might share with their friends. When we put it into a broader context, it doesn't feel as oppositional. It doesn't feel as different. And so we remind the couple that they have the skills that they need to be able to work through this challenge. And when we recognize that this isn't just something that I want to do, but that this is a real deep emotional need. This is how I feel I'm going to get through this. This is really important to me. So it's not something that should be minimized by the husband, even though he doesn't need it, nor should his need for confidentiality be minimized by his wife. And I think that has the potential to be very deep if they can work through that. And if Adarab, if they don't, so that can, when someone's confidentiality is breached, that's a very serious breach of trust. And trust is one of those things that we really need in a marriage to be happy and for it to continue in a stable way. So this is an important conversation, but it's not one that I think is out of the boundaries of other kinds of conversations that couples have together.
Yeah, it's a really good point. That's a really good point. And like it also brings back, it like normalizes, right? This is not something which is abnormal. This is an example of a disconnect, a debate, a difference of perspective, or a difference of, of attitude towards any given thing. So just like we may differ when it comes to politics, and we may differ when it comes to, do I like spicy cholent or not spicy cholent? How do we cope with it? It's just another thing that the couple has to learn how to deal, how to be able to continue being that loving spouse, despite the fact that there are disagreements. And there's no husband and wife that, I mean, I can't say that, but typically husbands and wives have disagreements. Reminds me of that story of Shlomo Zalman.
Yes.
Someone once told me, a guy once told me the following. He said, I do not need to speak to anyone. I do not need a therapist. They were going through IVF. He said, my wife was going to therapy. She had her own therapist, and I don't need any of that. I don't need friends. I don't need support groups. I don't need anything. And then he asked me, am I normal? Am I normal? Is it weird that I feel, and I love my wife, I want kids, I'm pained by her pain, but I don't need to talk to anyone. I don't need to book a session with a therapist. I don't need to join a support group. I don't need to go on an evening, for couples who are waiting to have children. I don't need that. So he asked me, am I weird? Am I normal? Am I weird? What would you respond to such a person?
What did you respond to him first?
I said, you have to ask the Rabbi Bleicher. No.
So
I want to hear your
it's a
position.
great question. I think you reminded me of a really important point, and I'll come back to the answer. I'm not dodging it. I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about fertility treatment, there are so many different steps along the way that a couple can go through, from Clomid, from medication to IVF. Um, and I think it's important to recognize that just because a couple makes a decision about how to share or what to share or with whom to share their struggle, at one point in the journey, they can also be open to changing that at some point later on. And so this man who doesn't need to talk to anybody might, if he's on the journey long enough, might reconsider and might say, you know what, I think I want to talk to this person. And it's important to give people permission to be able to change how they cope and how they work through these challenges. In terms of this individual, there is no normal. When we talk about an abnormal situation, right, this is, as we said before, it's 1 in 5 couples. So it's common, but it's not so common. And so there is no normal. How each individual chooses to navigate this journey is entirely up to them. If they're functional, if they're getting through, it sounds like he's a highly functional individual and he's able to be happily married. I think that the point that I would be concerned about is if he minimizes his wife's need for emotional support, or if he looks down on how upset or the depth of her pain, that would really speak to, a big disconnect between husband and wife. But if he's able to be emotionally supportive and he's functioning on his own and he doesn't feel like he needs to talk about it, that's okay. I'd be curious about what other ways does he have to cope other than talking to people. He probably doesn't recognize that he might be doing things in response to the pain. It might
Right.
not be as
Right.
deep and as broad, but there's something. He's doing something, and he might have built-in resilience and coping skills. And ashrefa, if he has it, it's amazing if he can tap into that without even realizing it. But there is no normal, and I think whenever part of the challenge of couples, part of the challenge that couples experience is that they feel so abnormal, they feel so different, that we're the only ones in this situation, or even if we know that we're not the only ones, we're one of the few. And it can feel very, very isolating, and you can feel very different on a regular basis. Emotional capacity and how we cope does not need to be another example of how different we are and how, I don't remember, weird or unusual the individual is.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. I had a deep conversation with him about exactly what you said about you don't think, right? You don't think that you need to cope with anything or deal with anything, but we went through some interesting ways of other issues that came up. He had a mother who whatever was very sick, so kind of like going through that as well, bringing it into the fertility space. I want to ask you another question, which is a hard question, and it's a difficult one. Not just hard in that it's hard to answer. It's a really emotionally difficult question. I think that anyone who's been through the emotional roller coaster called the infertility journey um, knows what it's like to have that embryo transfer and then 2 weeks of waiting for a positive pregnancy test. And when the pregnancy test is negative, or when the call comes from the nurse and she says that it's negative, the case that I'm presenting, the wife throws herself into bed and crying, doesn't want to get out of bed, can't get out of bed. And sometimes the husband is kind of just standing at the foot of the bed, not sure, like, do you want a hug? Do you not want a hug? Do you want words of encouragement? Do you need your space? What Eitzah would you give to a husband who has he has his wife in front of him crying after the failed cycle? Now there's a caveat. He could also be in pain. He could be in less pain. He could be experiencing the same amount of pain. It's just not necessarily presenting in that way. Or maybe he also wants to jump into bed, crying, in pain, not talking to his wife. So how would you address kind of the male in that situation, who is kind of, he looks to himself as a victim, but also feels a certain sense of achrayus, like, my wife is crying, I have a duty as a husband to see to it that I take care of her. How is he supposed to take care of her in a time like hearing the news of a failed transfer?
You presented it so accurately. It is so overwhelmingly painful to think about and to visualize that scenario, and something that unfortunately is too common. I think back, I'm reminded of something that I learned from one of our mentors, Rabbi Dr. David Fox, who encourages us to pause and to check in with ourselves. Now, so in that moment when they get the news and he sees his wife just broken, crying, sobbing in bed, and he's not sure what to do. So that's a classic male trap. What do I do now? And number one, we don't need to do all the time. We can just be. And if he can take a couple of seconds and just, what am I feeling inside? What am I feeling in my heart? How am I feeling physically? Is my heart, is my body, do I need to lay down because I can't physically support myself? Do I need to cry? Do I need to go for a run? What do I need to be able to survive the pain of this moment? And only then can he look out towards his wife and think about, what does she need? And I think if he can stay in that space, I'm not saying that he needs to, but if he can, he doesn't need to do anything in that moment. If he needs to leave the room because it's too overwhelming for him, just let her know, I'm also in pain right now. I'll be back in 2 minutes. I just need a minute. And then when he comes back, that same question is going to be there. And once he's tended to himself, to say, I see you, I see the pain that you're in, I see the pain that we're in, right? To constantly be trying to remember that we're in this together. And that's something that is a really protective force for a couple struggling with infertility, because so often, the OU did a study on women who were divorced, and they found that so often the treatment plan of what people decided to do next was a source of serious tension that sometimes led to divorce. And so it's important to pause and to just check in. Like, what do you need? What do we need? How can I help you? Do you want me to just sit quietly? Would it be okay if I cried with you? Do you
If I
need
could play
me to
devil's
call?
advocate,
Yeah,
if
go
I
for it.
may, you know what I need? I need a baby. I
I
need a
know.
baby. You know what I'm saying?
I
So
know you do. Of course you do. And Amir Hashem, one day we'll get there, but right now we don't have it. We can't promise, we can't offer, we can't give something that we don't have. We're doing everything that we possibly can, And the odds of an IVF transfer being successful are overwhelmingly positive. And initially, the odds go up. They're in your favor even after a first failed cycle. So it might feel like, I can't do this again. And maybe you can, maybe you can't. That's not a decision to make today. But of course, we need this. And of course, we're going to do it. We're going to continue doing everything we can. And we've never stopped. That's what brought us here in the first place, right? To really focus on the journey that they've been on, to focus on the strength that they have as a couple, to see each other's pain, even if we can't do anything about it. You're highlighting that fact. A man feels like, I need to do something. So, he can go to the store and get her a pint of ice cream, but he can't go to the store and get her a baby. And so, what are the things that he can do? And what are the things that are just beyond him? And what realistically can she expect from him? And then, in the devil's advocate situation, excuse me, there might be things that she asks for that he just can't give her. I want you to give me a baby. I know. I wish I could. I want to also. There's nothing more that you can say. And I think we all have been in experiences, as a therapist, when I meet with couples that are struggling with loss, whether loss of reproductive potential or pregnancy loss, we think about loss through the lens of what other losses have you experienced in your life, and how is this different, or how is this similar? And for him to recognize that when we experience loss, when we're overwhelmed, we might say things or ask for things or demand things that other people can't give us. And that's okay to be on the receiving end, but know that you don't have to respond in that moment. You can just listen. I know, I see that, how validating that is for her to hear. And of course, she knows that he can't give that to her in that moment. And so for him to take a step back, and that's why checking in with himself first and knowing, how am I feeling, so that he can respond authentically in the way that he wants to, not also feeling overwhelmed where he might be triggered and might say something, well, it's your fault. Why didn't you, if you would have done this, if you would have exercised, if you would have dieted, if you would have gone for that treatment, if you would sleep better, that's going to really end in a very downward spiral. So sometimes we just listen, just say, yeah, I wanted to.
You mentioned pregnancy loss and multiple times, right? Not only the Kohen Gadol, but just without, I'm sure, just your own experience as a therapist. That's another example of a different type of devastation that a man and a woman experience just by virtue of the fact that she's carrying the baby. So I haven't asked you easy questions, such easy questions, and I'm going to continue to ask you difficult questions. And this actually, I spoke to a woman today about this, a little bit of a different context, but it's one of the hardest questions I get after a miscarriage. So typically the woman's in nida, depending on the situation, but let's assume that she's in nida. No physical touch. Knowing that that the pregnancy just ended, and whether she still has the fetus inside of her or she went through the procedure, that they come home, and again, she experienced it in a very, very different way than the male. And she looks to her husband for support. What does that look like? How can a husband support his wife? He can't even give her a hug. He can't give her a kiss. He can't give her a massage.
Yeah.
Let alone knowing what to say and what not to say. It's true that they both, as a couple, experienced the loss, but again, in a physical manner, it was 100% her and 0% him. So what guidance would you give a husband in that really, really difficult and tragic situation?
That is a very, very profound question, and really speaks to the difference of experiences that husbands and wives, men and women, have on this journey, specifically in that moment. To quote Rabbi Fox again, just because this is one of my favorites that I've heard from him. When Chazal think about an ubar as a fetus being yerech imo, that the fetus is an extension of the woman's body. And that means that she is very aware of her status as a pregnant woman, that she is nurturing and growing and supporting and loving and caring for this body, this baby that's growing inside of her, and that this is the realization of her maternal dreams. When that is taken away from her, her husband has no deep way of understanding that. He can understand it intellectually, but he's not understanding it emotionally and certainly not physically of what it's like to experience that kind of loss. And I think it's important for him to recognize that. And she might not recognize that in the moment, but oftentimes when I work with couples, it's important to zoom out a little bit and recognize that sorry, I'm just distracted by the comments. I don't know if there's a way to for them to recognize that however they respond in the moment, there's going to be another day, and that he doesn't need to feel so pressured, nor does she need to be so critical of his imperfect response, because we're both trying to do the best we can. We're coping with something that's physically painful for her and emotionally painful, and for him to be able to understand that. And I think they can both seek support from outside of the marriage would be a very healthy way to cope. For her to be able to speak to, whether it's a relative, miscarriage, it happens 25% of pregnancies end in a loss.
Right.
And that, depending on different parts of the pregnancy. So again, it's one of those things that women, when they experience it the first time, don't recognize how common it is. But when they share it with somebody, oh, I had one, or somebody else had one, of course, every situation is different. But for them to understand that they can seek support and guidance from others as well, that this doesn't need to be entirely on my spouse. And to think about how they probably didn't mean, if he says something that she perceives or receives as hurtful or insensitive, it's not because he's trying to hurt her, but it's because he doesn't really understand the scope and the breadth of her pain and doesn't understand how to show up emotionally. This is something that I think we use the word unprecedented too much in our society, but this is something that could be unprecedented for this couple. They've never experienced a loss together. And so what we're noticing is that when they experience something that's unprecedentedly painful, that they're not themselves, they're not the best version of themselves. So we might need to help each other understand by talking about what it feels like, or really being direct about what I need from you right now. I need you to listen, or I need you to say something supportive, and to really articulate those needs very clearly so that he's not left guessing. Does she want a supportive, comment, or does she want to be left alone? Like, what do you need from me right now? How can I help support you through this? I've never been through this. You've never been through this. We didn't learn about this in chassan classes. I don't know what to do. I'm just being honest. I'm just in pain. And I think being open and transparent and being compassionate about this experience is a good starting point. Every woman is going to cope differently. Some are going to just pick themselves up and try again, and they don't need anything from their husband. And some husbands are going to feel it in a way that their wife might not have expected it. This might be the very beginning of their struggle with infertility. Could be, a pregnancy loss that indicates something bigger that they didn't know about, because oftentimes men have no idea what's going on in their reproductive tract, and women don't necessarily know either if their cycles have been regular. And so this could be the beginning of a very, very dark chapter. And so understanding that and giving each other space and compassion about that, around that, is really, really important.
Would you recommend, let's say, pregnancy loss can be spontaneous, it can be really totally unexpected, and I so appreciate the fact that recognition that we may be experiencing, so you may have a young couple that get pregnant right away, and then Rahman al-Islam of experience of pregnancy loss, young man, young woman, newly married, they're so new in their marriage, they haven't developed the skills to know what it means to have a devastating situation. But that's pregnancy loss. Let's just pivot back to IVF. Yeah. Would you recommend that every couple going through IVF at a time when they're not overly emotionally overwhelmed, hysterical, at a time where they're calm, cool, and collected, would you recommend that every couple have a conversation that would go something like, Mirz Hashem, B'siyata Dishmaya, we're going to do our retrieval, we're going to have a transfer, and 9 months later, we're going to have a baby. It's going to be the smoothest cycle anyone has ever had. But in the event that you don't respond well to the medication for the retrieval is painful and you're upset about it, the transfer fails.
Or there's a delay in any,
how do you want me to support you? Again, this is totally preempting. How do you want me to support you? I just think that could be such a healthy
that would be so healthy. That would be so amazing if we could offer that. And so many clinics have mental health professionals on staff, but they don't offer a full array of services. But they might be able to facilitate, the beginning of a conversation in the doctor's office, or if there's somebody else that they want to reach out to afterwards, and to just think about, the odds are in our favor, and we're great, we're close, we know how to navigate challenges together. But let's prepare ourselves, because if we can have a game plan, if there's an option B that we're aware of, then trauma happens when we don't expect something bad to happen, when something out of the blue, and we really don't feel equipped to be able to cope. And so I think what you're suggesting so beautifully is, can we help them just expand to see there might be a possibility that this might not go exactly the way we hope it does. And when it comes to IVF, whether it's a delay because the hormone levels are not where they need to be, or they find a cyst, or there's some other medical finding, or there's so many variables that can throw things off. I think it is a really good idea for a couple to be able to sit down and say, when we get bad news, what do we do? What's our go-to? So for him, is he going, spending time by himself? Is she going to talk to somebody? What are the coping skills that we're going to lean on, so that when we do those things, it's not going to be like totally unexpected. We're not going to begin to wonder, is my marriage crumbling, or what happened to my spouse? I've never seen this side of them. It's, oh yeah, I knew this was coming because that happened. And so the next thing is exactly what we talked about. That can be so helpful. That's such a great idea.
And what you mentioned earlier, it's critical that the couple has to know that just because they make a decision after, before their first cycle, doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the answer after their third cycle. And somewhere in the middle, we can readdress and revisit that. And, you told me before we started our first cycle that you wanted me to say that, don't worry, Hashem has a plan. And sometimes after too many disappointments, you don't want to hear that. I know that Hashem has a plan, but I don't agree with Hashem's plan right now. How many times are we unable to see Hashem's plan? How can it be that Hashem is bringing more pain? So don't bring up Hashem anymore. So then you realize, oh, that may have worked. We thought that was going to work for the first one, but now failure after failure, let's try a different approach. Let's but so it's an ongoing conversation, and perhaps a healthy tool for couples not to get obsessed over. It shouldn't be the topic of every single dinner, every single waking hour together. What are we going to do if the results aren't good? But maybe take the time when you're both feeling good and solid and stable, and beginning the process, let's say a transfer or a retrieval or whatever you're going through, or maybe it's it's a male topic. Maybe they're going to have a tessie, a micro tessie, and what's going to happen if the doctor comes out of that operating room and says, I looked through the whole testicle, garnished, no sperm, completely azoospermic. How are we going to process that? So maybe just that healthy conversation of preparing ourselves for that news. Not that it should happen, but preparing ourselves might put us in a very different scenario. Like you said before, trauma is when you don't expect it. Here, we can expect it. Maybe.
I think that's the title. That's the title of our talk tonight, is expecting the unexpected. And I also want to leave space for recognizing that because it's unexpected, we might not be able to come up with the solution that we need, and that in the scenario of somebody finding out that they're azoospermic, that has a serious consequence that might be irreversible. And it's hard for the mind for us to have our minds wrap our head around something that is so permanent, is so devastating. And we can plan for something theoretically, but in the moment, I think just as the medical treatment can change from day to day or hour to hour, our coping skills and what we need might also change as quickly.
For
And for
sure.
us to recognize that in ourselves and also in our spouse, that, I know that we had option B, and I see that that's not enough right now, and that's okay. So let's pivot. Let's do what we can to be able to get through this. Now, the challenge is that when we're feeling so taken aback or shocked or traumatized or sad, depressed, or anxious, we often don't have the mental and emotional capacity to be able to be that flexible, because flexibility requires, agility, and we don't have that. And so it's important to notice that I might not have the words to be able to express that. We might see it in our behavior or in our spouse's behavior more than the way that we're talking about it. And that might seem scary in the moment until we take a step back and remind ourselves that, yeah, we're responding to something that was really so painful and so unexpected. That's a hard thing to do. And I think, even us talking about it tonight is much easier said than done. But these are things that we can think about that, and I hope perhaps when this recording is available, then maybe a wife will want to sit down and watch this with her husband just to begin to open the conversation of what it could look like when we're facing something unexpected, something very sad or disappointing.
Yeah.
And that can be, something that brings the couple together, even though they haven't realized the full potential that they see in each other and their journey.
Amazing. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Rabbi Bleischer, can you end off with one tip or word of encouragement to so many men who are going through what they're going through, whether they're actually they're the patient due to a male factor issue, whether they're the husband for a female unexplained, they're pained, they're hurting, or their wives are hurting. What last final tip, or just positive or optimistic word of insight can we give to all of those listeners who are really feeling, a real void and real pain?
I want to honor that pain and I want to honor that void. Um, we know how deep it is. We know how isolating and lonely it can feel to be on this journey. And whether that's primary infertility or secondary infertility, it is real. And I don't want to minimize that. So what I'm going to share is not meant to be insensitive to someone for whom this doesn't resonate, and that's okay. Um, I think about the tefillah that we say, the prayer that we say as we approach Rosh Hashanah. We add a chapter of Psalms. We say, LaDavid Hashem Ori V'yishi, that ends off, Kaveh El Hashem, Chazak B'yametz Libecha V'Kaveh El Hashem, that we should have hope in Hashem. We all believe. It's just sometimes the failed cycles and the bad news kind of beats it out of us, and it's harder to access because it's beaten down lower and lower and lower into our hearts. But it's always there. And we know that, Hashem is with us every step of the way, even if we don't understand the plan and we don't see the plan. And we yearn to be able to see with clarity what the end of our story is going to look like individually, as a family, as a community, and nationally. And we know that sometimes there are miracles that happen. We know that Rabbi Siegelman, you and I, we know people who have experienced miracles. And we do this work because we hope that the next person who calls us with their pain and with their suffering, that they soon will be able to realize the hope that they have for themselves and for their family. And sometimes that can mean a lot of different things. It looks like a lot of different pieces. It could mean, getting stronger in your emunah. It could, doesn't have to. It could mean going to a different doctor and finding another expert who's able to maybe guide your treatment differently. It could mean that there's a new medical issue that requires specialized care, collaboration between your reproductive endocrinologist and a different expert in the field. And that might be the missing link. There's so many different pieces that go into Hashem bringing a healthy baby into the world and into your arms, that if every day we push things forward a little bit, if we if we can daven differently, if we can do something, right? That's something that's within our control, how we daven, how we learn. And sometimes that itself can be very triggering. And we feel like davening is not the answer. I've davened enough. So what else can I do? Can I connect with my wife in a different way? Or can I connect with a friend in a different way? But to keep moving forward towards that promised land of being able to hold a baby in your arms and to not give up hope, because there are doctors and there are organizations like PUA and there are friends and family that if they only knew what you needed in that moment, if you reach out for support, there's so many people who want to support you, who want to help you along your journey. And I think that in those dark moments when davening isn't enough and whatever else that we were doing isn't enough, to know that there are other people who can be there at your side, might not be able to help you move forward, but to just know that you're not alone. You're not alone tonight, and you're not alone after whatever happens in the future. And I think that to me is the greatest physic, because I know as a therapist, when I'm working with a couple or an individual, I can't bring a baby into their arms either, but I can bear witness to their journey. I can see the courage that they're able to muster, and I can see their determination. And to know that there are other people, there are doctors, there's family, there's friends, there's organizations, there are rabbanim, there are so many people that help bring that and make it possible. And so I think that would be the last word that I can share. And I
Absolutely
thank you for
beautiful.
creating a forum for being able to share this with those on the call and those who listen to the recording.
Baruch Hashem. It is Pua's schos. It is Pua's schos that we could do this, that we could have this space, that we could continue to provide the resources, the support for the entire community, but each cohort, each subpopulation, part of the population needs to be addressed and needs to be serviced, needs to be helped. Rabbi Bleisher, it's been an unbelievable schos to schmooze with you tonight, to hear your words of wisdom. Would you be kind enough to share your email address on
Sure.
the chat? If you click to share to everyone, because there are a few
Yes.
people that reached out to me asking how to get in touch with you. So if you click on everyone, if you could just share your email address, if you're comfortable with that, and people will be able to reach out to you with
Sure.
questions.
I'm not sure it's going through. I'm happy to share it orally for anybody who's listening. It's my name, BLEICHER LCSW@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Everyone should have bracha, hatzlacha. Keep up the great work. Keep up, as Rabbi Bleisher said, keep on moving forward day by day, pushing another day, another day, another day, bringing us closer to the ultimate goal, B'siyata Dishmaya. Thank you guys very much. A good night to everyone.
Shkach,
All the best.
Thank you.
Toiris Toivis. All the best, everyone.